call this meeting of the Standing Senate Committee on Banking, Trade and Commerce to order. I just wanted to mention to the members I would appreciate if you would be good enough to remain for about 5 minutes in camera at the conclusion of the meeting. Today the committee is holding its third meeting as part of its study on the use of digital currency. The committee began its study last Wednesday with an appearance by officials from the Department of Finance, followed on Thursday by 2 members of academia, both of whom had worked in the areas of private currencies and digital currencies. This afternoon, the committee will be receiving a presentation from the Bank of Canada. We are pleased to welcome Mr. Graham Johnson, Chief of the Funds Management and Banking Section, and Mr. Łukasz Pomorski, Assistant Director of this section. Thank you both for being here today. We apologize for being a little late in getting started. My understanding, Mr. Johnson, is that you will start with an opening statement, and Mr. Pomorski will follow with a technical briefing on digital currency.
That's
correct. Then have an opportunity of asking some questions. Mr. Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and both Łukasz and I would like to thank all the committee members for the invitation to speak to you today. It's certainly a subject I think we both do find very fascinating, complex but very fascinating. And as you know, the bank was asked to provide you with a briefing on digital currencies, and we are very happy to be here today to do so. Now, in discussing digital currencies, I think it might be helpful to put them in the context of advances in the payment system more broadly. So given that, I'll start by providing an overview of recent innovations and developments in payment systems and the role of the Bank of Canada. Then my colleague Łukasz Pomorski will provide you with more technical details about digital currencies and the needs they serve. Now, our briefing today is intended to provide some background on what e-money is and how it is evolving. Well, we will introduce some of the policy issues that the broad adoption of e-money could raise for the Bank of Canada. It is important to stress that our research in this area is still very much a work in progress, and many, if not all, of the policy issues remain open questions. We would, however, be pleased to return to this committee at a later date and speak to the policy questions in more detail once our work is further advanced. Now, as anyone who has ever visited the Currency Museum at our previous location on Spark Street will know, systems of payment have evolved over time to meet the needs of the society they serve. And within this context, we can see that digital currencies, or e-money, and similar innovations are part of this broader historical continuum. So before I discuss some of these innovations, I'd like to start with some basic definitions about what exactly it is we mean by money. Money serves 3 functions. First, it's a generally accepted medium of exchange. You can exchange your Canadian dollars for a coffee or a sandwich, for example. And the person who sells you the coffee can then in turn use the money received to buy other goods. This general acceptance is a critical role that money needs to play. Second, it serves as a unit of account. The dollar helps us compare the value of different goods. Again, for example, the cost of a Tim Hortons coffee compared to that of a Starbucks coffee. And third, it can be used as a store of value. You can deposit your dollars in your bank account and then be confident that when you withdraw them, they still will have a similar value in terms of the goods or services that they can purchase. Nous connaissons tous très bien la monnaie au sens classique du terme, c'est-à-dire les pièces et les billets de banque. Et lorsqu'on parle de dollar canadien, ce qui nous vient d'abord à l'esprit, ce sont les billets de banque canadiennes. Naguère en papier, désormais en polymère, ces billets demeurent une moyenne de paiement prisée des Canadiens. Au cours des 20 dernières années, la valeur des billets en circulation a progressé à peu près au même rythme que celui de l'économie. En dépit de la croissance des paiements électroniques, l'argent comptant garde donc toute son importance. L'argent comptant est important, mais pas toujours commode. On conviendra que ce n'est pas pratique pour certaines transactions, surtout celles de montants élevés, comme l'achat d'un réfrigérateur ou d'une voiture. Et puis, il y a aussi les risques de perte et de vol. Au fil des années, les innovations apportées au système de paiement ont permis de résoudre certains de ces problèmes. In the modern financial system, people typically store their money as deposits in commercial bank accounts. This money is denominated in state currencies and issued by regulated financial institutions through lending and the creation of demand deposits. And that is accounts that allow people to access their money on demand. Demand deposits are a medium of exchange and can be transferred from one account holder to another. Checks were an early innovation that facilitated such transfers. They save us the hassle of going to the bank to withdraw large sums of cash. Now, since the introduction of checks, we have seen a number of other technological advances that allow the transfer of account balances between people and businesses. These innovations include such things as debit and ATM cards, phone banking, internet banking, and mobile banking, all of which we refer to as access devices. That is, they provide access to our demand accounts, but they're not money per se. I should also mention, of course, the innovation of the credit card, which we use to transfer from our credit account at a bank. So again, credit cards are access devices in that they allow us to they provide us access to lines of credit. Now, for our discussion, we will refer to such access devices as electronic payments, or e-payments. And we continue to see innovation in e-payments. More recently, for example, we've seen the introduction of contactless debit and credit cards. These are the tap-and-go cards that you may see. Such improvements are driven by the evolving needs and expectations of consumers, but also by advances in technology. Now, importantly, e-payments are the domain of banks and other deposit-taking institutions that are subject to prudential regulation. Now, from e-payments, I'm going to move to the main topic of the presentation today, e-money. So in contrast to e-payment technology, e-money is actual monetary value that is stored on an electronic device. This could be a computer, this could be a mobile phone, a tablet, a chip card, or even a server in the cloud. It has a monetary value in a state currency, often from an issuer who assumes a liability for that value. And in this way, it's different from e-payments that don't have that intrinsic value, but rather provide access to funds in a bank account. Now, Lucas will provide you with a much more detailed analysis of what e-money is and what the main types of e-money are. But I will say that e-money was developed and is growing for reasons that are related to both demand and supply. On the demand side, online commerce has clearly created the need to be able to transact over long distances using telecommunication technology. Now, while existing e-payment methods such as credit cards can and clearly are used for such online transactions, they carry with them a number of potential disadvantages. For example, inconvenience. In the case of credit cards, the need to share a relatively large amount of information every time a transaction occurs. There's relatively high fees. Again, in the case of credit cards, merchants get charged for every transaction. Particularly for small value transactions, that can be prohibitive, and certainly cross-border transactions or international remittances are expensive. And finally, potential security risks, many associated with the amount of information that needs to be disclosed. Now, on the supply side, there's things such as advances in technology, the growth of the internet, and the widespread adoption of technology such as mobile devices and smartphones, which give people the means to use these new payment products offered by technology companies. We now have firms such as PayPal, for example, that allow users to pay over the internet without giving a full amount of personal information to the merchant with every transaction. Now, e-money can also make payments much more efficient and cheaper, especially across borders. Well, e-payments are facilitated by regulated financial institutions offering new ways for individuals and businesses to transfer money. E-money itself is often issued by unregulated institutions. And these include new players in the payments landscape, telecommunications companies, information processors, and even in some cases social networks. Now, while banks still provide payment services, they often seek partnership with non-banks in providing innovative payment products such as mobile payment. Quelle est l'importance de ces innovations dans l'économie canadienne? Une étude de 2009 réalisée par la Banque du Canada a montré que deux innovations en particulier, soit les cartes sans contact et les cartes prépayées, représentaient 3% du volume et environ 2% de la valeur dans l'ensemble des transactions. Ces proportions relativement faibles ont peut-être augmenté depuis. C'est pourquoi la banque s'emploie présentement à actualiser les résultats de cette étude. En outre, l'Association canadienne de paiement a estimé qu'en 2011, il y avait 24 millions d'opérations effectuées dans des monnaies électroniques diverses, d'une valeur avoisinant 10 milliards de dollars comparativement à 3 milliards de dollars en 2008. Ces chiffres ne mettent probablement en évidence qu'une partie de toutes les transactions de monnaie électronique réalisées au Canada. L'Association canadienne de paiement s'étant concentrée sur les opérations de porte-monnaie électronique et P2P, ou entre pairs. Le taux de croissance annuel de ces modes de paiement en volume s'est établi à près de 40% de moyenne pendant cette même période. Despite this growth, there are relatively fewer e-money products in Canada relative to some other countries. Some of you may remember Mondex, although neither of us do, but some of you may remember Mondex, which was a stored value card that appeared in the mid-1990s, but really failed to get any traction at all. This seems to suggest that Canadians are relatively well served by the existing methods of payment, and existing methods of e-payment systems in particular. Now, in contrast, consumers in countries with retail payment systems that are not as well developed need to seek out alternative methods of payment. And this leads to e-money innovations such as the mobile system M-Pesa in Africa, or multi-purpose prepaid cards such as the Octopus card in Hong Kong. Now, e-money addresses important consumer needs, but it obviously also raises potential risks and challenges. At present, such risks have the largest impact on individual consumers and businesses, rather than on the overall Canadian economy or financial system. The most significant risk posed by e-money is probably inadequate user protection. And this could include insufficient or inadequate information about a new payment service provider, especially about terms and conditions, fees, or dispute settlement procedures. Moreover, users may not fully appreciate the potential privacy issues associated with these means of payment, since some e-money providers have business models that depend on advertising revenue derived from sharing personal information about users. Other e-money developments provide relative anonymity, which entails additional risks such as money laundering and terrorist financing issues. Now, I believe, that our colleagues from the Department of Finance who appeared here last week have discussed these aspects of e-money in a little more detail. Now, the Bank of Canada has several reasons to be interested in e-money developments. The bank designs, produces, and distributes Canada's banknotes. And one potential impact of recent developments in e-money is that they may lead to changes in the demand for cash. There are at present about $63 billion worth of banknotes in circulation, and the bank invests the proceeds of issuing these notes in Government of Canada bonds. These bonds are held on the bank's balance sheet, and they generate interest income, which we refer to as seigniorage revenue. This revenue is used by the Bank of Canada to pay our expenses, and the balance is remitted to the federal government. In 2013, this seigniorage revenue was roughly $1.6 billion, and the remittance to the government was about $1 billion. Furthermore, the financial assets, these government bonds, that we hold on the bank's balance sheet help support the bank's various mandates, including our monetary policy and financial stability functions. A substantial decrease in the demand for cash would mean a commensurate increase in the financial assets on the bank's balance sheet. This would in turn lead to reduced revenue for both the bank and the federal government. And furthermore, the lower level of financial assets held on the balance sheet might also have other effects on the bank's ability to do the work we do. Now, given that the demand for cash has actually been relatively stable over the past number of decades, these risks at present appear to be largely hypothetical. The bank also has an interest in promoting safety and efficiency in the payment system. We work with other authorities in this area, and that given the bank's responsibilities under the Payment Clearing and Settlement System Act, we are collaborating with the Department of Finance to conduct a governance review of the payment system. This work addresses the oversight and governance of the national payments clearing and settlement infrastructure and includes alternative payments technology. So studying e-money and its implications for central banks is clearly a strategic priority for the Bank of Canada. The bank's research efforts in this area are focused on deepening our understanding of electronic money and payments as digital alternatives to cash, and analyzing the implication of an increased use of these alternatives for how the bank fulfills its mandates to provide secure banknotes, to promote financial stability, and to control inflation. Now, our research is going to inform a number of important policy questions. These include, should the Bank of Canada have a role as an issue or operator of e-money? Could the broad adoption of e-money pose financial stability concerns? And if so, how can these best be mitigated? What is the appropriate regulatory framework for e-money? And could increased reliance on e-money potentially have implications on monetary policy? Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, it is important to stress that our research in this area is very much a work in progress, and the issues I've raised remain open questions. Given the public interest and the importance of the topic, however, the bank intends to share its research with the public through a new section on our website dedicated to this subject. And the bank sees e-money within a broader continuum of payment system innovation. And as with any innovation, looking back at where we've been is a lot easier than looking ahead to determine where we're going. But with solid research agenda and by monitoring and assessing e-money systems, the bank is committed to building our understanding so that we continue to meet our mandate to promote the economic and financial welfare of Canada. I will now turn it over to Lukasz for a more in-depth explanation of e-money.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Graham. And let me start by saying that e-money is really difficult to define. And when you talk to people about it, there are multiple terms that are used almost interchangeably. So e-money, e-cash, digital money, digital currency, virtual currency, and so on. The problem is that people would use these terms with sometimes very different meanings. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about whether and how e-money could potentially satisfy the roles of money, of currency as we understand it. In terms of the medium of exchange, unit of account, and a store of value. Now, as Graham explained, e-money is monetary value stored on an electronic device, be it computer, mobile phone, tablet, or server. Now, to analyze it more deeply, I would like to divide e-money into two categories. One is centralized e-money, that is e-money that is issued and often managed by a central issuer who often assumes liability for the e-money, and decentralized, that is based on a dispersed network of users with no one user recognizing the e-money as its liability. I will begin with centralized e-money. So centralized e-money is monetary value stored on an electronic device that is issued upon a receipt of funds and accepted as a means of payment by entities other than the issuer. Now, this definition is used not only by us, but also by multiple other institutions, for example, the European Central Bank or the Bank for International Settlements. Now, the critical feature of centralized e-money is that it has a particular issuer who has a liability for its value.
Just for a moment, if you could just speak a little slower, our translators are having difficulty keeping up.
I will do my best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, as an example, consider prepaid payment cards, for example, those issued by Visa or MasterCard. Now, consumers who are using these cards could use the card potentially to obtain a particular good or service from the issuer directly. They might use the card for goods and services provided by a third party, for example, a merchant, that will be then subsequently reimbursed by the issuer. And lastly, the consumer might also be able to redeem the value of the e-money, perhaps using an ATM, and the cash will be subsequently reimbursed by the issuer to the bank. Now, another important and really a key feature of centralized e-money is that it's multi-purpose. That is, prepaid cards that are used for a particular store or particular, let's say, coffee chain wouldn't qualify for that. Now, to give you an example of a very popular e-money, centralized e-money device, I would like to talk a little bit about the Octopus card, very popular in Hong Kong. The Octopus card is a contactless card that is prepaid and was originally issued by the Hong Kong mass transit system. Now, over time, the Octopus card has become more generally accepted by retailers, and nowadays people use it to make other purchases, not only transport. Now, value on the Octopus card is prepaid, and it becomes a liability of the issuer. Now, it can be used to make payments at a wide range of retail and transport venues, which satisfies the multi-purpose criterion. Now, I would like to contrast the Octopus card, with a similar card that we actually have in Canada, the Presto card. The Presto card is used, the Presto card. It's a card that is used for transport services in multiple municipalities here in Ontario. Now, at present, the acceptance of the Presto card, oh, thank you, Graham.
A Presto card.
Now, at present, the acceptance of this Presto card is limited to the transport system. So you can use it to pay for rides, but not necessarily to make purchases for, let's say, coffee, newspapers, and so on. Now, when we compare the Presto and the Octopus card, there is this interesting question. Why did the Octopus card, so quite similar to Presto, gained widespread adoption in Hong Kong and is used for a variety of purposes, whereas here in Canada, it's used almost exclusively for transport? Now, in Hong Kong, since the 2000s, consumers have been using the Octopus card for not only for transport, but also for small retail transactions. In Canada, not so. Now, one reason is that in Canada, contactless debit and credit cards are already filling this economic need, filling this niche. Now, one last point that I want to make on the topic of centralized e-money is that sometimes when you talk to people about that, they would mention centralized digital currencies that are issued by particular internet companies, for example, Facebook or Amazon. Now, or in fact, used within some computer game systems, for example, World of Warcraft. Now, those currencies are actually centralized in the sense of being issued and controlled by a particular company. What we would argue, however, is that they don't really qualify as e-money. And the key reason why not is that they are intended to be used exclusively within those internet platforms, within those online communities. They are in no sense generally accepted as a medium of exchange, as a means of payment, and hence don't qualify as e-money. Now, having talked about the centralized variety of e-money, let us move on to the decentralized e-money and start with highlighting some of the key differences. So the main difference is that for decentralized e-money, there is no formal issuer. There is no central bank, no financial intermediary or internet platform. Now, e-money is decentralized over a network of peer-to-peer computer network that directly links users and in which no one user assumes control for the e-money. Now, when you think about this, maybe a good analogy would be to think about an internet chat room that links users, but no one user has control over it. Now, the standard example for decentralized e-money is the Bitcoin. Bitcoin was created in 2009, and since then there have been about 200 other similar currencies. We call them cryptocurrencies, and I will explain why in a second. And many of them have been created over the last few months, and a few of them have been since discontinued. Now, as the best known example of decentralized e-money, most of my remaining time will be focused on Bitcoin, and I will close by illustrating some of the similarities and differences between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Now, until the creation of Bitcoin, so until 2009, the very idea of a decentralized e-money was theoretical, and actually multiple specialists would argue that it's unsolvable, that it's only a theoretical construct, but couldn't be implemented in practice. Now, the biggest problem there was the issue of double spending. So let me explain why. Suppose that we develop a cryptocurrency, a digital currency, that I would like to send to Graham. Now, as I send this electronic record to Graham, the first thing that he will need to do is to verify that this record is authentic, is valid. Now, this step is relatively straightforward, and there are some tools in information technology that allow for this step. Now, in some sense, it's similar to taking a banknote and verifying that the banknote is not counterfeit. Problems will arise when I try to convince Graham that this record that I'm sending to him has not yet been sent to somebody else before him. So how do I convince him that I haven't already spent the information, the money that I'm sending to him? Now, notice that this is not an issue for banknotes, because once you spend them, they're gone. You cannot spend them twice. Moreover, when we talk about centralized e-money, it's not an issue either. And the reason is that there is this centralized issuer who keeps a ledger that summarizes who holds how much of a currency and is continually updated with transactions. Now, with Bitcoin and similar decentralized currencies, this ledger is actually shared on a network, on this peer-to-peer network, And because of cryptographic tools that the network is using, its validity is trusted despite the absence of a trusted third party, of the issuer. Now, from the point of view of technology, this development, being able to spread the trust across a peer-to-peer network, was a major innovation. Now, what this means is that there is no one issuer of Bitcoins. The Bitcoin itself is nobody's liability. And in particular, it's not redeemable. Now, because Bitcoin uses cryptographic tools to achieve this, we call it cryptocurrency. Now, there is a lot more to learn about the technical aspects of Bitcoin and similar currencies, and in particular, the cryptographic tools that they use. Now, we understand that you will be hearing from an expert in information systems engineering who will be better able to provide you with this information. For our talk, we would like to focus on the question within our own field of expertise, starting with whether Bitcoins, and by extension other cryptocurrencies, can satisfy the functions of money. In particular, we would like to also discuss how innovations such as Bitcoin might contribute to improving the efficiency of our payment systems, while raising some issues for the policymakers. So, as we saw in the discussion of centralized e-money, there were some cases where it met the criteria of money. It was a medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. And again, one of the key examples there would be the Octopus card in Hong Kong. Now, how does decentralized e-money, such as Bitcoin, hold up? We would argue that Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies fall short of the definition of money and do not satisfy the functions of money, at least at present. First, for Bitcoin to be money, to be currency, it would need to be generally accepted. It would need to be a medium of exchange. And while there may be some potential here, it's not quite there yet. So we do see that the Bitcoin network allows and facilitates transfers of Bitcoin between users. We also see a growing group of retailers, and some of them in fact global, that allow purchase in Bitcoin. Now, our search of Bitcoin-related enterprises reveals that there are anywhere between 100 and 200 retailers in Canada who accept Bitcoin for transactions. Now, worldwide, online sources would estimate that there are in the neighborhood of 15,000 goods and services that can be obtained for Bitcoin. Now, these are perhaps large numbers, but at the same time, in the context of the overall economy, what we would argue is that these numbers are not quite enough to persuade people that Bitcoin is, at present, a generally accepted means of exchange. Now, in terms of a unit of account, again, Bitcoin may have some potential, but it's not quite there. Even in those cases where Bitcoin is a means of exchange, the underlying value of a transaction seems to be always in terms of a state currency. So say the US dollar or the Canadian dollar. Such value would be then translated into Bitcoins for the purposes of a transaction. Now, this is true of most merchants who actually market themselves as accepting Bitcoins. In practice, such merchants rarely actually receive the cryptocurrency. Instead, they contract with third parties that exchange Bitcoins into national currencies at the moment of exchange of a transaction. An example of a company that offers such services is BitPay. It's an Atlanta-based company that provides the merchant with an option of accepting Bitcoins, but receiving the equivalent payment in state currency via bank transfer from BitPay. And finally, when it comes to the store of value, here again we would argue that Bitcoin falls short. The key reason is the variability of prices in terms of national currencies. So, for example, there's a recent report that estimates that the volatility of the value of Bitcoin is about 108% per year. In comparison, it's about 40 times greater than the volatility of the real value of a US dollar. Now, to illustrate this, consider that a few years ago, in 2010, Bitcoin traded at 0.3, a third of a cent per Bitcoin. It reached a high of about $1,200 in December, and I checked this morning, it now trades at about $430 per Bitcoin. Now, imagine that you're a merchant and that you're receiving Bitcoins for the goods and services that you're providing to your customers. Now, it would be really difficult for you because you wouldn't know how much those Bitcoins would be worth next week or next month. And a typical merchant wouldn't be comfortable to accept a medium of exchange that varies in value so much. There's an oft-quoted anecdote that I think well illustrates this. It's about probably an unfortunate soul who in 2010 exchanged 10,000 bitcoins for 2 pizzas. The pizzas were worth about $30 at a time. Bitcoin traded at roughly a third of a cent per bitcoin. In today's exchange rates, so this morning, those 10,000 bitcoins would be worth $4.3 million, making those 2 pizzas really overpriced. I sure hope so. Now, this volatility of Bitcoin means that customers who store value in Bitcoin are exposing themselves to a lot of variability and a great deal of risk in terms of what their savings could be worth, even in a relatively short period of time, even a week. Now, because of these reasons, some would argue that cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin are perhaps better understood and better characterized as speculative investment rather than reliable stores of value that warrant the designation of money. Now, in fact, some experts and some of our peers, for example, Bank of England, Bank of Finland, would suggest that Bitcoin is more similar to a commodity than to a currency. Now, I want to spend a little bit more time on this store of value aspect, because the price volatility of cryptocurrencies, of Bitcoin and other currencies, signals a very important difference between them and between state currencies that are issued by central banks. Now, many cryptocurrencies have delegated the management of the money supply to algorithm. Now, for example, in Bitcoin's case, the money supply is growing at a pre-specified rate. It will eventually level and remain constant forever after. Now, this fixed supply is arguably at least partly responsible for the variability of the value of Bitcoin in the presence of variable demand. Now, in contrast, one of the key roles that central banks play is maintaining the price stability in terms of state currencies, and specifically to prevent price volatility of the kind that we're seeing in Bitcoin. Now, one of the tools that central banks have to actually achieve this goal is changing the supply of a state currency. Now, this wouldn't be possible for Bitcoin, and arguably it was a feature that was attractive to some of the users of Bitcoin, but we would argue that it's a feature that has a negative consequence of contributing to price volatility. Now, this volatility makes it difficult for Bitcoin to be a reliable store of value and, consequently, a generally adopted currency. So, if we argue that cryptocurrencies at present don't really satisfy the key functions of money, why are they so popular? Why do we have them? Now, first, cryptocurrencies may help reduce the cost of financial intermediation. So, because they are decentralized, cryptocurrencies sidestep the high cost of facilitating and processing electronic payments. And such mediation is expensive and often too high, particularly for smaller value payments to be processed. And this effectively limits the scope of e-commerce to higher value transactions. Another feature that is related and that some at least consider positive is irreversibility of payments. Now, this allows the cryptocurrency to look more like cash and allows merchants to accept payments for transactions without the risk that these transactions would be later reversed. These two features, avoiding potentially costly intermediation and enforcing irreversibility of payments, could allow cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin, for example, to serve an important niche in the digital economy, and specifically for micropayments. So think about payments for, let's say, individual songs that you buy over the internet, or paying for individual, say, digital photographs, digital pictures. Such payments are too low to warrant merchants' investment in payments infrastructure or to justify the fees from existing instruments, such as credit cards. And finally, there's another feature of Bitcoin's design that is attractive, again, at least to some consumers. And that is the high degree of privacy, or to be technical, pseudonymity that Bitcoin offers. Now, transactions in Bitcoin are publicly available, but at the same time, they do not reveal the transactor's true identity. Now, again, this feature was meant to make Bitcoin more similar to cash. and cater to consumers who value our privacy. However, as with cash, there are disadvantages of allowing such anonymity. As we have seen, bitcoins can be stolen or defrauded from their owners. Moreover, the novel features of Bitcoin, anonymity, irreversibility of transactions, makes it potentially attractive to people who are interested in, say, trading illicit substances or potential money laundering, particularly over the internet. Now, I believe that our colleagues from the Department of Finance have already discussed some of these issues with you. Comme je l'ai dit tantôt, le Bitcoin est la crypto-monnaie dont on entend les plus parler, mais il en existe de nombreuses autres. Parfois, celles-ci sont dotées de caractéristiques destinées à pallier certaines lacunes perçues du Bitcoin. Parfois, elles ne sont que des imitations de ces derniers, auxquels on a donné un nom différent. Je vais vous en présenter quelques exemples. Le Litecoin, créé en 2011, est une crypto-monnaie dont le fonctionnement s'inspire largement de celui de Bitcoin. Des modifications ont toutefois été apportées au protocole original afin d'accélérer le processus de confirmation des transactions, le règlement. De plus, à terme, la masse monétaire totale du Litecoin sera 4 fois plus élevée que celle de Bitcoin. Pour l'heure, il s'agit de la 12e crypto-monnaie en importance sur le marché. Un autre exemple, peut-être plus intéressant encore, est celui de Peercoin. Cette crypto-monnaie est beaucoup moins populaire que le Bitcoin ou le Litecoin, mais elle est dotée de caractéristiques uniques. D'abord, il n'y a pas de limite au nombre total de Peercoins qui seront émis. Au contraire, l'offre de cette monnaie doit augmenter d'1% chaque année. En outre, une partie des Peercoins qui sont créés est remise aux participants qui accomplissent certaines tâches au sein du système, comme c'est le cas pour le Bitcoin et le Litecoin, mais aussi aux utilisateurs qui en possèdent déjà. En gros, si l'on détient, disons, 1% des Peercoins existants, cela donne le droit de percevoir 1% des Peercoins nouvellement émis. On pourrait comparer cela aux dividendes versés à des actionnaires. Finalement, mentionnons le cas de Ripple, qui témoigne de la rapidité à laquelle évoluent les monnaies électroniques et qui prouve à quel point la définition et le concept qui s'y rattachent sont fluides. Le Ripple est fondé sur une technologie similaire à celle de Bitcoin, ce qui fait qu'on le classe souvent parmi les crypto-monnaies. Toutefois, il est géré et émis par une entité centrale, Ripple Labs. Dans le jargon de Bitcoin, on dirait donc que cette monnaie est pré-extraite. Il est intéressant de noter que le Ripple est qualifié par son propre émetteur de système de paiement, de plateforme d'échange et de réseaux destinés au virement des fonds plutôt que des monnaies, en sens des moyens de paiement généralement acceptés. Les utilisateurs peuvent s'en servir pour échanger divers devises, y compris des crypto-monnaies, pour envoyer des fonds, etc. Ce qui leur approche effectivement plus d'un système de paiement que d'une monnaie électronique au sens strict du terme. Ce ne sont là que quelques exemples. Il existerait environ 200 crypto-monnaies à l'heure actuelle. La plupart ne sont utilisées que par une poignée de consommateurs, et certains, après avoir joui d'un engouement éphémère, ont déjà pratiquement disparu. Now, in closing, any discussion of e-money needs to take a balanced view of the weaknesses and potential risks of these innovations and their economic benefits. These benefits arise from payment needs that e-money satisfies. Now, as long as the needs are there, even if Bitcoin or similar cryptocurrencies ultimately fail, other payment innovations will arise to replace them. Now, one thing that history has shown us is that changing consumer needs, changing technology, will be reflected in innovations in payment systems. Such innovations may well be based on the technology that is similar to that underlying Bitcoin. Now, they may be implemented not only in a decentralized fashion, like Bitcoin, but perhaps also incorporated into products or services offered by private companies or maybe even governments. Now, the payment landscape is changing rapidly, both in Canada and around the world, with a number of innovations, participants, and systems. At the Bank of Canada, we cannot predict the exact direction that this innovation will take. However, what we can do is assure the committee that we'll continue our efforts to monitor developments and assess their implications. We will share our findings with Canadians through publications on our website. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Mr. Johnson and Mr. Pomorski for your opening presentations. Very, very helpful. We have just over 35 minutes left for questions. I have a long list of questioners, so I'm going to ask that you keep your questions sharp and to the point, starting with Senator Belmar, to be followed by the Deputy Chair of the Committee, Senator Urviu Payette. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour votre présentation. On a commencé donc, comme vous savez, l'étude du Bitcoin, parce que nous, on est vraiment intéressés davantage au Bitcoin, donc à la monnaie, la crypto-monnaie. Il y a quelque temps, bon, on a compris qu'il y avait des différences, comme vous l'avez là, expliqué, entre les modes de paiement électroniques et l'argent cryptographié, ou en tout cas la crypto-monnaie. Ma question a trait à la convertibilité. Bon. Je pense que par rapport à d'autres modes de paiement, l'innovation du Bitcoin et des monnaies semblables est beaucoup liée à la possibilité d'être convertible, mais en même temps, c'est ce qui fait fluctuer et c'est ce qui rend la monnaie là, très volatile. Si ce mode de paiement, parce que ce qu'on voit aussi, c'est que ce mode de paiement est utilisé beaucoup avec la mondialisation, dans le e-commerce, puis est utilisé aussi par Tesla. Hein, bon, c'est assez... on se demande pourquoi, là, Tesla. Un pays qui exporte beaucoup, puis qui voudrait encourager les transactions mondiales, aurait-il intérêt à se lancer en affaires et promouvoir finalement la monnaie cryptographiée, la monnaie numérique comme les bitcoins, mais ça pourrait porter un autre nom, et en quelque part offrir une certaine garantie pour permettre sa convertibilité puis empêcher la volatilité de la monnaie. Est-ce que c'est quelque chose à laquelle on pourrait penser? Et qu'est-ce que vous en pensez en tant que personne qui est à la Banque du Canada?
Bonne question, Madam Senator. I will make a couple of points. I think generally those countries that are active in global trade would support advances that make cross-border payments, international payments faster, more secure, and cheaper. That would tend to facilitate this. Now, one thing I should stress is certainly that at this stage, these methods of payment are largely person-to-person, and obviously a lot of exporting is business-to-business. It's a reseller buying from a supplier. It's one business buying from another business to resell. So there's been relatively little in the way of cryptocurrency activity in that. The other is, of course, credit is quite important for global trade. Letters of credit. There's no credit in cryptocurrencies, in fact. So that would, again, make that very difficult. A very good question about the price volatility. And as Lucas pointed out, at this stage, that's, in our minds at least, one of the key things that stands to make Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies really not fully meet the definition of money. And if one could think, you almost, in order to mask the volatility, you would need to control the supply of the money. If you have a, if you have a given supply of goods or a given level of economic activity that fluctuates, and you want to keep the price level constant, the amount of money needs to fluctuate to keep that price level constant. I would certainly say the Bank of Canada and most other central banks have set an inflation target as a way to achieve that we will manage the money supply as such, but the interest rate to keep the value of the Canadian dollar in terms of goods relatively stable. That is contrary to the very foundation of a cryptocurrency with a fixed supply. As in Bitcoin, that's impossible. So by definition, if the level of economic activity, if the level of trade, if the level of activity fluctuates, but the supply of cryptocurrencies does not, you're going to have volatility. It's a certainty. So those are significant.
Vous ne pensez pas que la vitesse de circulation de la monnaie pourrait augmenter? Est-ce que la vitesse au niveau des bitcoins est quelque chose qui pourrait être différente que la vitesse de la circulation de la monnaie régulière?
Yes, it certainly could be, but again, I mean, not a monetary theorist, but the velocity of money is extremely volatile and difficult to predict. So again, that can move around very, very rapidly, and can lead to large fluctuations in the relative price of goods in a certain currency. And if you look at, the price of goods denominated in Bitcoin, they would be extremely volatile, and part of that would be rapid changes in the velocity. I don't know if.
So what I would add to this is that I would always try to look at the underlying economic needs that the currency might serve, and I agree with you that perhaps the greatest needs are actually at the level of remittances or sending money abroad. And to the extent that people are not satisfied with the current offering, the current services, they might gravitate to services such as cryptocurrencies. And to the extent that cryptocurrencies can provide lower fees for these services, they might be eventually adopted. Now, I want to make 2 points here that I think are important. Number one is that if you develop a system to cater to this need for, let's say, remittances, then this is more of a payment system than currency. You're not issuing a currency, you're providing a service for this particular need. And in fact, one of the examples that I mentioned, the Ripple, the designers of that system were specifically identifying this area, international transactions, remittances, as one of the key features of our business models. At the same time, as I said, they were very clear that what they have is not currency, it's not money. They provide a way to send money abroad cheaply, maybe more cheaply than other methods. So in this sense, I think similar innovations may have a role, but it wouldn't be a role of currency.
Merci beaucoup.
Senator. Senator Hervieux-Payette, please.
Une petite question. Après que vous avez parlé tantôt d'M-Pesa en Afrique, il y a Octopus au Japon, vous dites que ça va être, ce moyen-là serait utilisé par des pays qui ont un système moins développé. Voulez-vous élaborer là-dessus? Qu'est-ce que vous entendez par système moins développé?
Mm-hmm.
Chair, no translation. We're not getting translation.
Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter?
Alors, je recommence.
Merci.
Dans votre présentation, vous parlez de un système en Afrique qui s'appelle M-Pesa, système au Japon qui s'appelle Octopus, et vous dites que ce mode de paiement-là, ce mode de transaction serait plus utile pour les systèmes moins développés. Alors, par rapport à qui? Par rapport à quoi? Est-ce que nous, on est un système développé, donc on n'en aurait pas besoin, mais d'autres systèmes, eux, en bénéficieraient? Alors, expliquez-moi où vous vous situez dans ce système développé, ou pas.
I'll just start, I mean, we referred to systems, and I think Canada is a very good example in this regard of a country with a very well-developed payment system with technology that is provided by major institutions that is very good. I don't know the number exactly, but a huge percentage of Canadians are what we call banked. That is, they have bank accounts with large institutions. When you're banked, you have things like debit cards, you have things like credit cards, you have this method of payment. In Africa, for example, there's a very small percentage of the population has a bank account. So a payment system such as M-Pesa helps to accommodate that. You don't need to have a bank account. You can load monetary value on M-Pesa and use that as a means of exchange. You don't need a bank account. So again, when I mentioned earlier the access tools to give access to your demand deposit to exchange. If you don't have a demand deposit, if you're in a country that's not well banked, an access tool does you no good. So you need a store of monetary value. As for the Octopus card, I'll turn to Lucas.
Si vous permettez, je vais répondre en anglais. So the point that I was making is that the Octopus card was a card that was designed specifically for the mass transit system, and very quickly, within a few years, it gained widespread adoption across a variety of retail establishments, so not only transit. Now, since then, there were two similar innovations, one in the UK, the Oyster card, and one in Canada, this is the Presto card that we were talking about, that technologically are actually very similar. These are contactless cards. You can store some value on them, and you can potentially use the value not only for rides on a transit system, but also for purchases. Now, somehow in Hong Kong, these cards actually became used for a variety of purposes. Both in the UK and in Canada, they haven't. They're used almost exclusively for transport. And the way that I would interpret this is, as Graham said, we already have a payment system that caters to the needs that such cards might satisfy. For example, contactless debit or credit cards would allow you to pay for your coffee or newspaper in a blink of an eye. You just tap the card and go. So in Hong Kong, perhaps those new devices were competing for people looking for this convenience, whereas in Canada, that niche was already catered to, already covered. So in this...
The transportation card in Canada, I mean, people pay for it. I mean, this is what you use for a monthly pass. I mean, money is involved in that.
I agree. Now, the key difference is that here we're using the Presto card only for this one use. And I would go back again to one of the defining feature of money as being generally accepted. So if you're using this card only for this one service, I wouldn't call it money. Whereas in Hong Kong, it's actually used for a broad range of services. Now, as other examples that are uni-use that we could talk about, we could talk, for example, about stored value cards that are issued by Bridgehead or Starbucks. So these are cards that are used exclusively to buy coffee or whatever it is that you buy at a Bridgehead. They're not used outside of a chain. Or you could think about maybe even things like air miles. So air miles can be used for some variety of services, in particular for airplanes, but also for goods, but for goods specifically from one provider. You cannot take your Air Miles card and go to Walmart, for example, and use it to buy some other goods. So because of this wouldn't qualify as money. These are not generally accepted means of payment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Black to be followed by Senator Massicotte.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both. You've been very helpful in advancing our study. I'm working, my line of questioning this afternoon is going to focus on opportunities that might flow from this innovation.
Right.
So I would start by asking if you would agree with me, and I think you do, that Bitcoin is an innovation, not the end game.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think we would agree with that.
And you would agree as well?
Absolutely.
You bet. So from that point of view then, how might we in Canada, and we'll get specifically to your role in my next question, but how might we in Canada be able to harness the positive aspects of these currencies while mitigating downfalls? Can you offer your views on that, please?
Mm-hmm.
So I would make, again, coming back to a distinction we made and made in the opening remarks and one Lucas made, and to use Bitcoin as an example, there's a difference between the big B Bitcoin, which is the network, this underlying technology that allows verifiable payments without a trusted third party to go very cheaply, which really was quite, my understanding at least, in computer science, quite a material breakthrough. Then small b Bitcoin, which is the currency that it uses right now. I think there's no doubt that the payment system technology underlying this was a material advance. As you said, Senator, it's an advance. It's not the end game. It showed that what was seen to be unsolvable isn't. So there will be more work done on this. And I think, in terms of payment system efficiency, absolutely, this is these are good advancements. The question of how you harness it, while at the same time protecting people, is one that, quite frankly, we will spend a lot of time. We have not really formed solid opinions on that. To date, it is largely a consumer protection education aspect. People should, really just even the education of the volatility of the underlying currency, that the price is very volatile, that it is not broadly accepted. That's as I said, that seems to be the biggest issue right now, and quite frankly, is something that falls outside of the Bank of Canada's mandate. But again, we will advance our research on this.
A work in progress.
A work in progress.
A work in progress. Great.
Much like the system itself. Yes.
Absolutely, and that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Can you see a circumstance where the Bank of Canada would issue e-money?
So, and there's a question. The Bank of Canada issues Canadian dollars under the Currency Act. That is the legal tender of the Government of Canada, and the Bank of Canada is the sole issuer of that. So we issue Canadian dollars. Under the current legal act, we couldn't issue another currency. So in terms of a digital currency, not under the current legal framework, the e-money or e-payment system is a different one. We currently do not. We could, for example, we could have made the decision to offer demand accounts to Canadians, which we did not. We could have made the decision to offer debit cards for those demand accounts to Canadians. We did not. The decision, well before either of our times, was clearly that this level of innovation and scale and customer service was best left to the private sector in an appropriate regulatory framework. I think that has served Canadians very well. Going back to the fact we have not seen a lot of the sort of octopus type cards or M-Pesa, Canadians are very well served by their payment system technologies now. And
so, are you shutting the door to the question?
No. Again, this is as I said in my opening statement, one of the key questions we're looking at is there what is the role of the central
Tremendous,
bank?
Thank you. And my last question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I'm advised that there's something called Mint Chip. Great
Yes.
name. And I'm told that the
It's a
Mint
cookie.
Chip... I'm told that Mint Chip is being developed by the Royal Canadian Mint as a digital currency backed by the government. Can you comment?
I would actually defer that to the Mint.
You would as well.
I would. I also would defer that comment. I mean, I can tell you that we are in contact and communication with our colleagues at the Mint who are working on this or were working on this innovation. But I would be out of line if I were commenting on this on behalf of the bank or the Mint.
Are my researchers close to right that you would understand that might be the case?
No, so I would say that in terms of the product that was being developed, it was essentially an e-money development very similar to the ones that I was the centralized e-money development, similar to the ones that I was talking about in my presentation. So you're right. This is one of examples of where an institution might go in terms of issuing e-money.
Where Canada might go.
Or where Canada might go, right? I mean, it's certainly a possibility. It's a possibility that has been evaluated by the Mint.
Sure,
but again, I will stop short from.
I understand, of course I do.
It's a very good try, Senator.
Thank you,
Black.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Massicotte.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous deux.
Oui.
Je vais juste faire commenter. Senator Black, last statement, you sound like a journalist trying to pry something out of somebody. On n'est pas expert. Effectivement, beaucoup de nos discussions, c'est d'apprendre un peu c'est quoi le Bitcoin, c'est quoi tous ces devises-là. Mais d'après ma lecture, moi, je suis pas mal convaincu que ça peut jamais devenir la devise nationale ou je sais pas, quand vous servez le mot monnaie, je pense, vous parlez peut-être de la devise nationale, je ne sais pas. Alors, moi, je suis pas mal convaincu que ça peut pas l'être. Juste pour l'effet de politique monétaire, pourquoi le gouvernement perdra contrôle totalement de sa politique monétaire à quelqu'un d'autre, etc., etc. Mais aussi, d'abord, je me demande, OK, comme devise, comme moyen d'échange, y a-t-il une utilité? C'est quand même desservi d'un sens important. On fait beaucoup de commentaires que ça coûte très peu. Mais je pense que c'est un commentaire qui a été erroné. Ça coûte très peu au point de vue de l'émission du message technologique, mais il faut que tu l'ajoutes d'un exchanger de quelque chose. Et ensuite, il faut que tu serves cette devise-là pour acheter ton produit. Vraiment, ça coûte quelque chose avec ton miner, quoi que ce soit. Tu as quelqu'un qui, devant la devise, ça coûte relativement cher. J'ai vérifié ça après-midi. Même si c'est souvent catégorisé plus, ça dépend quel niveau. Et quand tu ajoutes ton produit, il y a tellement de variations du prix que tu penses te sauver d'argent avec le coût. Ben non, tu as payé peut-être 5-10% plus cher parce que c'est pas connu et on ne sait pas. Bon. Et l'autre chose qu'on fait l'argument de dire high degree of privacy. On était avisé la dernière fois que non, c'est pas le cas. On peut, comme qu'on a fait l'Internet, on peut vérifier qui. Si on pensait que c'est comme l'Internet, comme les je pense que c'est faux aussi. D'abord, la question que je me pose, c'est quoi l'utilité future? Là, c'est un happening, c'est in. Il y a un moyen de marketing dans les fournisseurs. C'est quoi l'utilité future? Et la question fondamentale, c'est quoi notre rôle au sens gouvernement, Banque du Canada? On fait quoi avec ça? On a-t-il une obligation morale de protéger ceux qui en ont? C'est quoi vos commentaires en ce sens-là?
So, as I think we both said, sort of in any area, looking into the future is extremely difficult, especially one this rapidly changing. A couple of points, Senator. I think you make a very good point about the importance that governments place on maintaining control over money and control. It's a very valuable tool. Obviously, I would think so. The Bank of Canada. It is a very valuable tool for economic, for economic management. In terms of the utility that Bitcoin brings, I would again distinguish between the big B Bitcoin payment system and the small b currency. As we've seen payment systems evolve over time, they generally allow for transactions to take place simpler, faster, and cheaper. And there continues to be a progression along that. This is clearly a step along this road. The transactions are quite quick, are irreversible, and can be done much more cheaply than in a lot of other areas that use trusted third-party providers. That may well be the most fertile ground for future work here. It's very true what you said about the price volatility, making it difficult as a means of exchange. Lucas's example of the $6 million pizza is a good one. And again, I'll turn to Lucas in a second, but one hears about these 15,000 merchants or however many there are that accept Bitcoins. Well, really what a lot of them do is they don't really. They accept it and then instantly turn it into a national currency, a U.S. dollar, a euro, a Canadian dollar, for exactly the reason that you said, sir, that there's zero interest in holding this for even a day because of it. So, in effect, people can use the Bitcoin payment network by waiting to the very last minute. You go online, you wish to purchase something, you wait to the very last minute to buy your Bitcoin, you immediately pay with it. The vendor immediately turns it back into Canadian dollars, U.S. dollars. So you've used the big B Bitcoin network, and you've minimized your exposure to the small b Bitcoin currency, which again is a possibility. But we don't have a crystal ball, but these are some of the potential advantages that the system offers.
I'm not optimistic on the small b Bitcoin. I probably because I don't understand it, but I'm not optimistic that as a long future. I agree the technology is phenomenal. It probably could use the registration of other assets, maybe even real estate or other valuables and so on. I think it's phenomenal. But in a small b, I don't see much future. And I'm also, from my readings, that 80% of the holders are speculators. It's basically more of a commodity than a currency. Now, in fact, as you know, income
And
tax
some
wise,
have.
and U.S. and Canada are basically saying that exactly. It's a property. But having said that, then the next question is: do we have a responsibility as a government? Do we deflate this balloon? Do we do it like China? What do we do? And one could argue. I think Senator Kachuk last week said, if 80% of speculators, they have a right to do so. Why should we care? Why should we try to protect anybody? It's, buyer beware, and people know it's a very, very high variable currency. So maybe there's no role for the government. Maybe other than to say, be very, very much aware, be very cautious, be careful. Should be a role?
I think consumer education is financial education, financial consumer education is an important role. To the extent that much of the interest in Bitcoin in the early adoption was a sort of, and I know this was covered in previous sessions, a sort of libertarian view of, get away from state currencies. Once it started to move, much of the interest did become speculative. And again, speculation is perfect. There's nothing wrong with that, and I don't think it's the role of the government to protect anyone from knowing speculation. I think, there is an important role of consumer protection at this stage, because it is at least portrayed as a currency, and perhaps to just be clear that this is not the Canadian currency. This is not a guaranteed CDIC. Does not stand behind this. You're not in a bank. That consumer education is a role. Certainly within Canada to date, from the Bank of Canada's priority in terms of sort of economic risks and systemic risks, it's far too small. The amount of Bitcoin in Canada is far too small to be systemically important at this stage, economically important. That doesn't say it won't become that way. And again, my point that this is a work in progress. This will evolve. Could it, if it gets several orders of magnitude bigger, would the story change? Potentially, yes. And it's again speaks to the fact that we're following this very closely, and it's a very active research agenda.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Further questions? Senator Campbell.
Just one, or actually two. Do you think that we would even be looking at this if there hadn't have been Silk Road? It sort of captured our attention. It has all of the makings of a great spy movie. But do you really think we would be here if it wasn't for...
So, that's a very good question. And certainly the backstory behind Bitcoin is fascinating. With Dread Pirate, the guy who ran Silk Road.
Silk Road.
Yeah, with Silk Road, with Dread Pirate Bob or whatever his name was. But even with Mt. Gox and the subsequent collapse there, the backstory is extremely interesting and certainly makes for good journalistic coverage, and I'm quite certain has accelerated. Nonetheless, I would we be looking at it? We certainly would. And to Lucas's point, we, the Bank of Canada, we held a conference on e-money 2 years ago. I think before Bitcoin was really in the common lexicon. This is a material advance in the payment system. This is a material advance, this is a material advance in money. It's a material advance in payment system. It's something we need to understand. The Bank of Canada has been, we do have a currency department. We have been studying alternative means of payment for 30 years. Well, even probably longer, I'm sure. My comments about the risks to the bank of people, of demand for cash falling off precipitously, and that this would have impacts on the Bank of Canada's balance sheet, which would have knock-on effects. These worries existed when credit cards came out. These worries existed when debit cards came out. You could well look and think, well, if everyone has a debit card and a credit card in their wallet, wouldn't the demand for cash collapse?
Right.
It never did. Cash, the banknotes outstanding goes up 5% a year, well, roughly in line with nominal GDP growth, or the growth of the economy. It goes up at 5% a year every year, and has done so for the past 3 decades. But we pay a lot of attention to this. We have paid attention, very close attention, to every advancement in the payment system: credit cards, debit cards, automatic check clearing, and we will continue to with this.
So, if I may, Add to this is that I wouldn't necessarily trivialize Bitcoin or similar cryptocurrencies. It's easy to do so.
No, I
for the
wasn't
reasons of-
trying to do that.
I understand
It's just
that.
all of a
but
sudden it went from off the radar to
To
every
everybody's
day.
talking about
Every
it.
day you're reading it, yeah.
No, Senator, I do take your point. I mean, it's unfortunately, perhaps, it's a lot of attention is driven by things like Silk Road or colorful names. But at the same time, I would bring this back to the question of you mentioned regulation, and should we be regulating that innovation? It's always a question of a trade-off. So what is it about Bitcoin that we want to regulate? Is this any systemic issue? We don't see any. So at present, the only dimension there is consumer protection.
Right.
But there is also this other side of a trade-off,
Yeah.
and that is the gain to our economy, the gain to our consumers who may be using these tools for particular needs, for particular goals. And let me offer just one example on this point. So, one of the features of cryptocurrencies that are often considered nefarious is anonymity. Now, I would suggest, and they are nefarious for very good reasons, okay? But at the same time, suppose that you want to transact with a merchant who is based in Poland. I will use this example because I'm of Polish origin. How comfortable would you be to send your credit card number, your address, etc., to a merchant who's based in that country? You might not be very comfortable. But at the same time, if we have it doesn't need to be Bitcoin. I don't want to put my head on Ripple or anything else, actually. I don't want to market any of these developments, but these developments do have a role as providing you a way to transact with a merchant, let's say in Poland, without revealing who you are, where you live, what your credit card number is. So even things like anonymity actually have a role and have a need that some consumers are looking for.
My second question involves Octopus, and I actually had the opportunity to meet with the board of Hong Kong Transit, because in Vancouver we were looking at this type of a card, and I brought this up with them about the transit card. Their comment was the reason that it branched from transit into other areas is because such a high level of the population uses public transit that it's just natural that they have this card, whereas in Canada it's not that large, and so transit actually looked forward on this and started with this, but realized that they captured this huge part of the population, because the Octopus obviously would like to come to Canada, and when we looked at it, we thought, I don't think this is going to get the lift. Right. So they were quite clear on that they had a captive audience, and they were going to push this card, and it's hugely successful.
So,
I'm disappointed, Senator Campbell, you never thought of Bitcoin then. I thought.
We're going to conclude with a very brief question from Senator Belmar.
Mr. Président. Je voudrais savoir, en termes de chiffres, l'offre de money supply au Canada, en termes de milliards, c'est rendu à combien comparativement à l'offre de Bitcoin au Canada? Il l'a dit au début?
Not an expert in money supply, and there's a lot of definitions of it. If I could answer
La
in
étroite, la fiduciaire.
M1.
M1, oui.
Would have to come back to. In terms of currency outstanding, it's 64 billion right now. In terms of banknotes outstanding. In terms of M1.
Well, but I wouldn't go to M1. I would try to compare apples to apples.
Yeah.
So if you talk about that specific currency, I mean, as of today,
It's 63.
well, talking about the money supply of Bitcoin in terms of US dollar or Canadian dollar is a little bit tricky because those numbers are changing very rapidly. But as of today, the money supply of Bitcoin is of the order of $7 billion, which essentially is globally, which is 100 times smaller, roughly, than the money supply of cash. So not money supply, but supply of banknotes in Canada alone. So in terms, and you may want to add to this the supply of, if I remember correctly, $1.2 trillion worth of banknotes that the U.S. emits. So in terms of the importance of Bitcoins at the moment in the global system, it's relatively unimportant, which perhaps explains why we haven't seen, in terms of a systemic impact, any evidence that it might have any impact at the moment. Again, it does have an impact for consumers, for individuals who transact it, often with high risk to their wealth, but not systemically. Not in Canada and certainly not worldwide.
Merci.
Even shorter concluding question from Senator Massicotte.
Senator Bellemont's next question would be, having said that, right now there's a delay around 10 minutes for every transaction, and it's growing a little bit. Is there technology even available to do international currency?
So there is a delay, and I think, Bitcoin is not instantaneous. Obviously, the miners have to verify this, and the ledger has to be updated, and it can take an hour to do a full chain.
Yeah, because you've got to do it all again.
Now, the other thing that advances as quickly is the amount of computing power that is devoted to this, and I don't think we have it with us, but you can certainly see graphs that show essentially whether it's the hash rate, what it's referred to, essentially the network computing power, because this is a peer-to-peer network, so these are computers, and they have now become, gone are the days when you could hook your laptop up and mine Bitcoins. These are now special purpose dedicated machines that are extremely powerful. More and more get on the network every day, and the amount of computing power devoted to this has gone asymptotic as well. So I think it's been a bit of a draw so far, but...
So what I would just finish off on the idea of it, to offer one statistic. At present, there are about 40 transactions in Bitcoin per minute, as compared to maybe 200,000 transactions on Visa alone. So a question that I'm not an expert to answer is whether Bitcoin could be, in principle, able to handle that volume of transactions, perhaps. Now, one thing that I wouldn't, but I will be very careful about is that Bitcoin is not the only innovation. And in fact, at least one of the examples that I gave you, I think it was the Litecoin, actually is designed in a way to cut the settlement time, I think, to a quarter. So the way I would view this, again...
Most interesting, but our time is coming to an end. On behalf of all of the members of the committee, I would like to express our great appreciation to your presentations today. You have talked about being a work in progress for the Bank of Canada. I think you can also see it's very much a work in progress for the committee, and I suspect we will look forward to having you back. To members of the committee, if I could ask you to stay just for 5 minutes in camera to talk about future business.